Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. This video is about Donald Trump sending in the feds to various cities. Um, his almost war on civilian America. Trump of 20,000 lies. If you see the Washington Post, they have listed over 20,000 lies or misleading statements he's made on the record since assuming the presidency. He says that there's crime in Chicago, he's got to send them in. Now, admittedly, there was a horrific shooting a few days ago and he sent them in. But there have been several large-scale shootings in the United States during his presidency. He's never sent the feds in there. Like, think of, I think it was called Parkland High School. I believe it was in Florida about 2.5 years ago. No thought of sending the feds in there for a higher death toll. So he thinks sending in the FBI, alcohol, tobacco and firearms, that bureau, the Drug Enforcement Agency, that's the way forward. Now, obviously, these government agencies operate all over the United States anyway, but he's telling them to particularly concentrate on certain cities which are in Democrat hands. And he's made it explicitly political, saying, because they're controlled by Democrats, I need to do this, and they're no good with dealing with crime. Obviously, it's up to the people of those cities or those states to judge this and to elect whoever they wish. I know the federal government has a role to do with federal crimes. And all right, it's true that some of the crimes being committed are federal. But isn't it astonishing the way he's got such a proactive, to put it politely, approach to law enforcement when he thinks it's other people and the other, presumably ethnic minority people, he's trying to target. But when he's under investigation, he throws the toys out of the pram. When one of his is being questioned, he thinks it's outrageous, it's totalitarian, but he behaves like a totalitarian himself. For someone who is extremely authoritarian, he's very anti-authority when it's an authority he doesn't like. I can't remember what that personality disorder is called. I know he's got the narcissistic one, the dark triad. But when there was a lawful investigation of him, because of ample evidence of grave felonies, up to and including treason, he said it was like Nazi Germany and so on, when, of course, he's the one who's in league with a vicious totalitarian dictatorship in the shape of the Russian regime. So why Chicago? Partly because a lot of ethnic minority people there. Obviously, Michelle Obama is from there. Barack Obama spent much of his adult life there. So I suspect there's some racial undertones to this. It's a stronghold for the Democratic Party. Now, it's true that there are more crimes and conurbations the world over. Okay, in rural areas tend to be fewer. Why? The population more diffuse. Outsiders are noticed. You can't blend into the crowd as you can in a large city. I studied criminology, and it's just a well-known phenomenon. There are more young people in the inner cities, particularly the inner cities. They tend to have lower socioeconomic status, more temptation to commit crime, more unemployment. Therefore, they're at a loose end. The devil makes work for idle hands. So when you catch a juvenile delinquent, you often say, why did you do this? It might not be economic crime, graffiti, vandalism or something. They say quite often, I was bored. So feeling they haven't got enough to do. Anyway, so he wishes to concatenate Black Lives Matter with violence. Now, there have been a huge number of BLM protests around the United States. Tens of millions of people have been taking part in BLM protests. And I mean that in the United States, tens of millions. And obviously several million overseas as well. I took part in a BLM protest in London. And to pretend that they're violent, and then his acolyte Tucker Carlson saying so as well. Now, they have all these protests, and yes, there'll be a handful of morons who'll go and burn a car or something, which is a despicable thing to do. No one's car should be burnt. And we actually don't know that those who are setting cars alight are BLM protesters. And to try to pretend that everybody in BLM is responsible for this, even if indirectly, to take the spotlight off police brutality. And I'm not condoning the vandalism that some people on the edges of BLM protests have participated in. I mean, burning a car is a terrible thing to do, but there's no comparison. That's not as bad as murder. And certain police officers have carried out murders. Obviously, police kill hundreds of people each year in the United States. Or sometimes they're right to kill them, but there are other times they're not. And yes, it's disproportionately black people who get killed. So, and then Trump lying, claiming that it's all about defunding the police. And some people want to defund the police, not take away all the money, but some of it, because obviously the last 30 years, the police in the United States, they've been increasingly militarized in most states, having military-grade weapons and armored personnel carriers, those sort of vehicles, and having a militaristic attitude to the civilian population, viewing them almost as the enemy. And I'm not saying every police officer does, but as you're not actually at war, you don't need the weapons of war. I realize they do need some firearms. And then it just changes the attitude. There's a thing called clothed cognizance, that if you put on certain clothes, you feel differently, you behave differently. If you put on a suit, you might feel more efficient, more formal, things like that. It gets you in the right frame of mind. If you put on a dinner jacket, or ladies putting on an evening dress, they feel more elegant, and they feel more courteous, or something like that. So if these guys, if they're donning this a panoply of war, accoutred with a whole chest full of weaponry and gizmo, they might feel very wary and behave in that manner. I got all this stuff, I'm feeling really hard, I want to try it out. So it has a psychological effect on them. So crime is bad, including when crime is committed by the police. And I'm not suggesting that most police officers in the United States commit crime, but it's a few. But unfortunately, there are others who condone it, who turn Nelson's eye, who don't report on people. So let's not ignore crime where committed by the police or anybody else. And also we should say, well, as Gordon Brown originally came up with this one, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, socio-economic causes. And yes, there is agency, and people have got to take personal responsibility. It's a lot easier to be more responsible if you're in an idyllic situation than if you're in a dreadful one. So other causes of crime, partly drug criminalization. You could decriminalize it and see the crime rate drop. Or, sometimes even handing out heroin substitutes like methadone, and then they're not going to be burgling so many people. You might say that has us over a barrel. Taxpayers shouldn't have to fund their drug habit. Well, I know it's not an ideal solution, but I'd rather that than these people commit crime, which costs a lot more to deal with in terms of taking them to court, sending them to prison, and the harm they wreak on other people. So drug criminalization is something for another video, which I think I might have talked about elsewhere. But if you could decriminalize it, you'd take drugs out of the hands of the gangsters, and there'd be less profit for them, and there'd be less crime, and so on. You see how spectacularly it's backfired. It's really boomeranged until the 60s, cannabis and so on. And amphetamines weren't banned in most countries till the 20s. Even heroin and cocaine weren't banned. And I know these are very harmful substances. I would discourage anyone to take these sort of things. They're very dangerous. But is the criminal law the right instrument to deal with them? I submit that it's not. Family breakdown can be a problem for this. And obviously the government can't force people to stay together. If children being born to parents who are scarcely adults themselves or incapable to cope, having more children than they can afford, and not everyone's going to be sensible, and not everyone's got self-restraint. But if they had contraception easily available or available free of charge, then fewer children will be born in difficult circumstances. Because jobs are so low paid, people might steal on top of that. Because there's lack of affordable healthcare or higher education. Again, this is going to exacerbate the problems of criminality. So timing is significant. Why now? Why is he starting this assault on urban ethnic minority America right now? Here we are, scarcely 90 days from the election, and I assume it's very much electoral. For 3 years, he's done nothing. All of a sudden, it's war on crime. Perhaps he's failed at everything else. The economy is imploding. Unemployment's reaching 15%. Coronavirus shows little sign of slowing down. Well over 1,000 deaths a day. Is going to pick up in the cold weather, virtually every expert says. And the lockdowns are all over, and nobody's minded to go back into lockdown. And he failed. He didn't get personal protective equipment or ventilators. He didn't distribute them sensibly amongst the states. He did it on the basis of electoral strategy, giving most to Florida, a key swing state, and based on how much these governors are willing to do obeisance to them. He's not built the wall. Mexico is not going to pay a cent for it, as he said himself. He has not stopped Muslim immigration. He has not won in Syria or in Afghanistan or in Iraq, and he's not withdrawn from any of those countries. He's not won the trade war. He's not brought back jobs. He has not funded Medicare. He has not funded Medicaid. He has not replaced the Affordable Care and Patient Protection Act with something better. He has not made medicines way better, as he said. He has not made medicines way cheaper. People have not got tired of winning. He has not drained the swamp. He has not locked her up. He's broken promise after promise after promise. Failed. even in his own terms. So then he has to launch blistering attacks on whatever the outgroups are. So to find enough scapegoats. So he didn't obtain the permission of mayors or governors to send in the feds. Now, the United States government can send in these federal agents, the FBI, obviously Homeland Security, DEA, ATF for specific purposes, but he's trying to give them a broader remit than they really have. Surely he's acting ultra vires. Now, Homeland Security and so on, they're there to protect certain federal buildings or properties which are temporarily being used, not to just go around and do ordinary policing, trying to take over from the local sheriff's department, state troopers and so forth. Why are the Republicans not calling him out for this? They ought to castigate him. What about states' rights? They're supposed to believe in that. Say, oh, we don't like Washington, or people inside the Beltway are far away. Ted Cruz and then Republican blowhards like Steven Crowder are often saying, oh, it's terrible that the federal government's so far away it's doing this. If it's federal, it must be bad. At the same time, these people are militarists. They want their big military. The military as a federal government is the biggest of big government. Oh, it's the coastal elites. New York's on the coast, in case you didn't know. Trump was born a multimillionaire. So how elitist is that? Washington, D.C., well, it's very close to the coast. Anyway, so this is a strategy of tension. And Jacques Chirac, the president of France, used to call some of these urban dwellers racailles. And it's the same sort of thing, trying to aggravate the situation to provoke people who'll be unhappy about being harassed by these jackbooted goons who are armed to the teeth, coming across as very menacing, and that might cause clashes. So Trump, I'm sure he's never heard of Trotsky, but he seems to be pursuing this Trotskyite stratagem: the worse, the better. If you can make people more furious, if there can be more violence on the streets, people say, oh, we need to turn to Trump, we need him as a savior, because Trump will take the gloves off. There's no legal or ethical limit to what he'll do. He used to, before he became president, he boasted he would bring back far worse than waterboarding. So he was bragging he was going to use frank torture. He said that he would deliberately target civilians if he became president. Now, I don't think he has. Obviously, plenty of civilians have been killed by American bombs in Iraq and Syria and so on, but I don't think they purposefully killed civilians. That was as a collateral damage. You might say that's a false distinction. Anyway, so false accusing of Joe Biden of proposing to defund the police, which he didn't actually, although some people don't want to take away all the police funds, but take away the unnecessary funding for war equipment. So you see, he's trying to exacerbate bifurcation in the United States, and there's this increasing political bipolarity. So hyperpartisanship has reached such a stage that Trump can really do anything, and it seems to be at least 35% of the population would be on his side. So he's going for re-election, obviously. As I said, he's failed on so many things, and it's galling to see him posing as the champion of law and order. Yet in a press conference, he wished Ghislaine Maxwell well. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell, she's facing charges of sex trafficking and so on, and the sexual abuse of minors. Now, she's got the presumption of innocence, that's that. I mean, wishing someone well might seem a decent thing to do, but he certainly didn't wish people well if they're on the other side, even though they weren't accused of anything. So the most vicious things about people constantly, journalists who ask him worthwhile questions, particularly if they were female, he's frightened of strong women. But why is he being so pleasant towards Ghislaine Maxwell? Does she know something that he doesn't want the public to reveal? He was certainly a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein. I never liked the guy, Trump subsequently said when it all came out in the wash. Well, he certainly gave every impression that he met him on many occasions, and Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew. So at Palm Beach, they were near neighbors. Epstein going around to Trump's place at Mar-a-Lago. Trump going around to Epstein's house. So Trump's been accused of sex crimes by something like 40 women, including of actual rape by at least one. It's staggering. So far as I know, he's never actually been questioned in connection to any of these. So he's an unlikely person to be thought to be exemplifying law and order. He's not exactly straight-laced. So in 2015, that February, before he announced he was going to stand for the presidency, Trump was being interviewed on television about this whole Jeffrey Epstein situation, and he said, well, Jeffrey Epstein's island, it was a cesspool. Wow. So Trump knew it was a cesspool and didn't report it, and he said, ask Prince Andrew about it. So he's linking Prince Andrew to the allegations. Well, that's fascinating. So Trump lets on far more than he reveals. a bit like saying he's got nothing whatever to do with Russia. I mean, the most flagrant lies, provable lies, unblushingly told, despite him having been trying to do business in Russia since 1987, him comparing this Miss World pageant there in 2013, him having signed documents of intention, letters of intention about building a Trump Tower in Moscow. He had a great deal to do with Russia, had huge numbers of clients buying his condominiums for well over the odds, and getting funding, it seems to be from Russia, Russian banks, because no Western bank besides Deutsche Bank would touch him after about 2000 because he was such a liability because he'd gone bankrupt 4 times. Deutsche Bank, which was found to have been a sewer for filthy money from Russia, for kleptocrats, for embezzlers. So Trump is clearly a prolific criminal. Just look at his profile, look at his track record, and it is staggering and nauseating that he's never had his collar felt. One of the fairy tales people tell themselves about America is that there's equality before law. Patently, there isn't. You look at someone like Trump, who's so rampantly criminous, who gets away with it, who's never, ever been arrested. It is staggering. Well, I'm just constantly flabbergasted by this impunity that he seems to enjoy, and well, it's notable that Miss Ghislaine Maxwell, she's charged with federal crimes, i.e., Trump would have the power to pardon her. Now, her trial's not going to begin until July 2021, even though it was an immediate result. Trump may well not be president then, and therefore not in a position to pardon her. So he may well cease to be president on the 20th of January, though he's hinted he's going to contest that if he loses, as he's likely to do. No president has ever said that they wouldn't accept the result if it doesn't go their way. Patently, he expects to lose. If he believed it was probable he'd win, he would say, yeah, sure, I'll accept the result. But because he thinks he's going to lose, he's already saying, no, I won't. And come up with all these false statements like last time that millions of illegal immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton. So far as I know, not a single illegal immigrant was caught voting. I don't know of a single person who fraudulently voted, who committed impersonation, who double voted. If there are, tell me some. There might be a very few. But it had no material effect on the outcome of the election. So obviously his Republican governors are very friendly to him, trying to suppress the vote, just like some of them in Florida are just not reporting coronavirus deaths to keep the figures lower than they really are. 150,000 already, the highest number in the world. And I know the US has got a high population, but it's not the very highest by a long shot. So you just think of all the frauds he's committed. So he's a blatant con man. Marco Rubio rightly called him a con man right before Trump got the nomination. The sexual assaults he's committed. Now, I'm not absolutely certain he's committed them, but there's just an extremely high chance. You'd have to be an absolute moron not to believe that he did commit them. I mean, one person could false accuse him. 2 people could false accuse him. But to think that 40 women would independently accuse him, more or less telling the same story, and which he's confessed to on camera, saying, yeah, they just let you do it, grab them by the pussy. No woman wants to be grabbed. She might want to be touched, but not grabbed. So ignoring subpoena, and the whole thing about subpoena is it's under punishment, as in the threat of punishment. Either you hand over this documentation or it's jail time. So there's obstruction of justice there, constantly striving to impede investigations into his associates. Anyway, the emoluments clause, which he's broken again and again, as president, sending troops to stay in his hotel so the money goes to him. And things like that, or having Mike Pence stay in his hotel in Ireland on the opposite side of the country from Dublin, a very long journey, just to get even more money for him, and things like that, doing everything he can to keep a certain Scots airport open because that's convenient for his golf resort, and on, asking his ambassador to the United Kingdom to see if more Trump golf courses could be open in the UK. Now, I'm not absolutely sure that last allegation is true, but it's exactly the kind of thing he would do. He has previous. Wow. It's just mind-blowing. It's sickening what he's got away with. And I would very much like the moment that Biden is inaugurated to see Trump and Ivanka and Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, all those being arrested for all the terrible things they've done. And I would remind Donald Trump that high treason is still punishable by death in the United States. Being a Russian agent, taking bribes from them, collusion with electoral interference. What on earth was that meeting about? To try to get dirt on Hillary from a hostile government, from a government that was attacking America's ally in Ukraine and elsewhere. So Trump cannot tergiversate, and that's why you could say that he's senile. So he's, pre-Alzheimer's, that's what he's probably got. His father had Alzheimer's. That's what's been such a declension in his mental capabilities. So he may well be judged unfit to stand trial because he's not compos mentis. So sadly, he may get away with it. But he's the most despicable president the United States has ever had. I know some of them did terrible things like own slaves, but that was at least considered normal in that era. I mean, by the standards of today, he's just vile. And it's, again, astonishing that a lot of the Christian right stays with him. These Christian fundamentalists who are holier than thou, who are oh so moral and ethical, and yet he was swearing his head off, saying, I'll cut your taxes, motherfuckers, boasting about the size of his membrum virile and things like that. A serial adulterer who used to phone up the New York Post and make them publish headlines about his extramarital affair with Marla Maples, saying she claimed it was the best sex she'd ever had, and stuff like that. Staggering. Now, I'm not a moralistic person. I'm no Puritan. I don't really mind about his private life, but they certainly should. They're supposed to be against all this sort of sinfulness. Anyway, so that is Donald Trump. I just can't wait till we see the back of him. But he's exhausting and enervating. And if Biden becomes president, as looks increasingly likely, people might appreciate some placidity from him. So a long period of quiet and tranquility might make him a very popular president. Let's see. Toodaloo.